And welcome to video number 4. We're on page 4. So, page 4 is really boilerplate. There are some really powerful pieces of this so that you're going to want to become very familiar with. I'm not going to read it line by line. It does give us the definition of adverse fact. And then it talks about material adverse facts too, which we touched on briefly. It talks about deadlines and days. It does say deadlines expressed as number of days from an event are calculated by excluding the day of the event and by counting subsequent calendar days. So I want to make sure we've got clarity on that. So let's say we had 7 days as our days for a deadline. Today is not day one. Tomorrow is day one. So you'd go tomorrow, the next day that you'd count it out for 7, and that's the definition of days. So the day you're currently in does not count as day one. It talks about defects, it talks about the firm, it talks about fixtures. Now, by the way, 181 through 194 is a great paragraph to read through with your seller when you're back at line 1, page 1, I should say, talking about what's included on line 6 through 11 in their sale price. So I always read through that with them because that might spur an idea of something that needs to be excluded from the offer or from the listing agreement. Here's the material adverse facts which we covered. Person acting on behalf of a buyer. It talks about who that is. It talks about the property, and then let's talk about protected buyers because this is one that you want to be very aware of. Unfortunately, that would be in the event you are not successful in getting it to a sale during the time you have the listing. There's an automatic extension for some buyers for a period of 1 year post this listing agreement. So that's why I want to make sure we're clear about it. And it says a protected buyer means a buyer who personally or through any person acting on behalf of them during the term of the listing does one of three things. One, they deliver to the seller or the firm or its agents a written offer to purchase, exchange, or option of the property. So, if during the time I have it listed, we get an offer from somebody, they automatically become a protected buyer for the purpose of this paragraph. Number two, they view the property with the seller or negotiate directly with the seller by communicating with the seller regarding any potential terms upon which the buyer might acquire an interest in the property. So, I want to be really clear with the seller. Mr. Seller, during the time of our agreement, even if you have a buyer approach you, they are considered protected under this contract. Now, here's what I've always said to my sellers, and this happens. A sign goes in the front yard, someone drives by, they go knock on the seller's door, and they say, "Hey, I want to see your property." What I've always told my sellers to do is to hand my business card to that buyer and say, "You know what, I'm not comfortable with letting you in the property. My agent would be more than happy to talk with you and schedule a time for that." And so I always couch it this way in today's world with some of the awful stuff that goes on. Don't put yourself at risk. Hand them my card, have them call me, let me pre-qualify them, ask questions, do everything I would do, and then if they are a qualified buyer for your property, I will schedule a time with you to show it to them. And that way we can eliminate number two in many cases because then that buyer gets to me and I get their information. And then another third definition of a protected buyer would be anyone who attends an individual showing of the property or communicates with agents of the firm or of cooperating firms regarding any potential terms for which the buyer might acquire interest, but only if the firm or its agents deliver the buyer's name to the seller in writing no later than 3 days after the earlier of the expiration or termination of the agreement. The requirement in number three to deliver the buyer's names to the seller in writing may be fulfilled as follows. One, if the listing is effective only as to a certain individual who are identified in the listing by identification of the individual, or if a buyer has requested that the buyer's identity remain confidential by delivery of a written notice identifying to the firm or the agents with the buyer negotiating and the dates at which they are negotiating. So here's the thing with that. So let's say during the time of the listing, we didn't get any offers. However, I had open houses, we did showings. I had people inquiring via the phone and asking things like, would your seller take less money? If I can capture their information, their name, and as much information as I possibly can, and the listing expires, within 3 days of the expiration, I provide to the seller that list of names. Those people become protected under this clause in the contract for a period of 12 months from either the expiration of the contract or the cancellation of it. which then is an expiration anyway. Make sense? Please, please, please do not overlook item number 3. It could help you get paid more times than you think, and it's a little bit of work, and it's worth it. Now you've got to provide that list to the seller in a way that's agreed to on the last page of the listing agreement. We'll talk about that when we get there. Now, lines 218 says a protected buyer also includes any person acting on or behalf of the buyer, joined in interest with, or otherwise acting on behalf of a protected buyer who acquires an interest in the property during the extension of the listing period as noted on 220 to 224. So this protected buyer idea comes into this next paragraph where it talks about an extension, and it says the listing term is extended for a period of 1 year as to any protected buyer. Upon receipt of a written request from the seller or a firm that has listed the property, the firm agrees to promptly deliver to the seller a written list of those buyers known by the firm and its agents to whom the extension period applies. Should this listing be terminated by the seller prior to the expiration of the term stated in the listing, this listing shall be extended for protected buyers on the same terms for 1 year after the termination. So it's a little complicated, yet here's how it works in theory. I have the listing for a period of time. Let's say I had it for 6 months. Was unsuccessful getting it sold. Had a number of showings. I've kept really great records of who those people are. So I provide that list within 3 days after the expiration of the contract to the seller of all of those names. And let's say during the time of the listing, we did have one offer. It was low. We couldn't get it to agreement. And so now I've got kind of two separate sets of protected buyers. First and foremost, that buyer who wrote the offer is automatically protected for a period of 1 year from the expiration of the contract. So that buyer, if they show back up, whether let's say for example the seller relists it with somebody, that buyer shows back up, that buyer is protected under our contract, which means that if that buyer writes another offer, the seller is obligated per this agreement to notify us and let you step back in and act as the listing agent for that negotiation and get paid as if it were under the same contract. That's the key. Or if a buyer on the list you provided who didn't write an offer during that period of time, however, did attend a showing, went to an open house, whatever, comes in with an offer, again, the seller is obligated to notify you as the prior listing agent and let you take it over. This does happen a handful of times each year, so it's worth paying attention to and making sure it's there. And that extension is for a period of 1 year after the expiration of the contract. So that's page number 4. We'll move on to page 5 in the next video.